Numbers chapter 23 verse 24. Behold, the people shall rise up as a great lion, and lift up himself as a young lion. He shall not lie down until he eat of the prey, and drink the blood of the slain.
Today, the pride's protector has earned his keep.
Genesis chapter 49 verse 9. Judah is the lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Psalms chapter 18, verse 32 through 40. It is Most High that girdeth me with strength and maketh my way perfect. He maketh my feet like hinds' feet and setteth me upon my high places. He teacheth my hands to war, so that a bow of steel is broken by mine arms. Thou hast also given me the shield of thy salvation, and thy right hand hath holden me up, and thy gentleness hath made me great. Thou hast enlarged my steps under me, that my feet did not slip. I have pursued mine enemies and overtaken them. Neither did I turn again till they were consumed. I have wounded them that they were not able to rise. They are fallen under my feet. For thou hast girded me with strength unto the battle. Thou hast subdued under me those that rose up against me. So what is feminization? The root word of feminization is actually feminize. Feminize, by definition, would be to make something more characteristic of or associated with women. Okay, well, to make is, by definition, well, the second definition is to cause something to exist or come about, to bring about. So what caused this feminization, or who brought this about?
Another thing that's really important to bring up here, we don't know why testosterone levels are dropping. It could be environmental, all the chemicals around us, pollution. If there's something out there in the environment causing us men to have lower testosterone levels, then we got to figure out what it is.
Now on Wiki, feminization actually redirects us to femininity, which is also called girlishness, womanliness, womanhood. These are sets of attributes and behaviors or roles associated with the female. Femininity is socially constructed. It is made up of both socially defined and biologically created factors. Socially constructed. This was built. This wasn't naturally existing. So by definition, a social mechanism or socially constructed social mechanism, phenomenon, or category created and developed by society, a perception of an individual group or idea that is constructed through cultural or social practice. So someone or something brought this into reality. It was suggested that femininity was not introduced into the English-speaking societies until the 1300s. Right after the bubonic plague in England, it had wiped out basically half of the population, leaving the women with more opportunities. Prudence Allen traced this era and says this is when the concept of the woman actually changed. Women began working outside their original daily roles as wives or widows or mothers. Femininity and womanhood were first recorded in 1380 by a Geoffrey Chaucer. Chaucer was known as the father of the English literature, first to be buried in the Poet's Corner. He was a author, a philosopher, astronomer, and a member of the royal court and diplomat. You would know him today by his work, The Canterbury Tales. It was believed that Chaucer attended St. Paul's Cathedral School, where he most likely was first introduced to the influential writings of Virgil and Ovid. Okay, now we have a clue. Here, we get more of a lead on more than just the biography or the background of Chaucer, but we get a look into his mind. Here we can get a bit of his beliefs, or kind of take a look at where his mind was by taking a closer look into who influenced Chaucer. Now, Ovid's books were reported by readers as insolent, meaning disrespectful or rude. Ovid was known as the most popular and most loved Roman poet of the Middle Ages. Renaissance writers would use his works as a way to read and write about sex and violence without the common pushback from Bible believers. Now remember that. Now the important work that catches the attention would be Ovid Morales, a French work that moralizes the 15 books of Metamorphoses. This is what influenced Geoffrey Chaucer. Ovid's poetry provided for the Renaissance idea of humanism. Renaissance humanism is the study of classical antiquity across Western Europe during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, starting in Italy. Classical antiquity is known as a long period of time focused on the Mediterranean Sea, where the Greece and Rome, known as the Greco world, highly influenced Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Renaissance humanists wanted to create a group of people that could speak and write with such persuasion and clarity that they could get involved in their communities and persuade others to virtuous and prudent actions. Okay, so now, where did this humanism come from? What's its origin and what's its reason? This leads us to a patriarch. Patriarch was known as the father of humanism. Patriarch was born Francesco Petrarca. Petrarch was the first to develop the concept of the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages was a term of historical periodization used to refer to a period of cultural and economic deterioration and scarcity of written record. Scarcity of written record and cultural and economic deterioration.
I need that book. I mean, I want the book. And you, if you make me choose, I'll kill you. I'll take the book.
Why? Why do you want it?
I know its power. If you read it, then so do you.
I always believed that I'd find a place where this book belonged, where it was needed. I haven't found it yet.
Remember that as well. Now, the word periodization is the process or study of specially categorizing the past in order to study and analyze history, which gives them descriptive details of different periods of time. Origin of periodization goes way back to Western traditions of myths of ancient Greece and the Bible. Many of the first humanists worked for churches and held high positions in the church.
One thing he said in particular that sparked a firestorm of criticism from the liberal press was his observation, and I'm quoting him, that the radical feminism, which has assaulted the church and society since the 1960s, has, he said, strongly influenced the church, leading the church constantly to address women's issues at the expense of addressing issues important to men. And this, said the Cardinal, has been accompanied by a complete collapse of catechesis in the church. In other words, instruction of the young and adult converts in the basic truths of the faith. They are no longer taught the faith. And this, combined with this process of feminizing the church, has involved what he says, a fluffy, superficial kind of catechetical approach to the question of human sexuality and the nature of the marital relationship. In the sanctuary, liturgically speaking, notes Cardinal Burke, and I'm quoting him again, apart from the priest, the sanctuary has become full of women. Who hasn't seen that in a typical parish where the new liturgy is celebrated? He went on to say the activities in the parish and even the liturgy have been influenced by women and have become so feminine in many places that men do not want to get involved. End quote.
Some also lawyers and chancellors. Some known humanist churchmen would be a Pope Pius II, Sixtus IV, and Leo X. Majority of the humanists of this being influenced by high-ranking church authority went into improving the understanding and translations of biblical and early Christian texts. This was actually known as a period in time called rationalism, where intellectuals basically would challenge traditions of old or ancient manuscripts and writings. Humanist church figures had access to book copying workshops, so it was not hard to reprint new manuscripts with their new ideas. In Italy, they formed a humanist education program which was rapidly accepted by the 15th century. Many upper class had received humanist education. One Pope Aeneas C. Louis Piccolomini was the author of one particular treatise, The Education of Boys. These subjects came to be known as humanities, and the movement they inspired is called humanism.
In order for them to evolve, they have to get rid of what's constraining them. What's constraining them? The law. The law. What is constraining them? How do you destroy a Christian nation? Take the Bible away. They took the Bible out of school 50 years later, they're killing each other. They took the Christian, remember it should be prayer in school. They took it out 50 years, they're killing each other. Because when you take that away, there's no morality, there's no absolutes. A child needs to know thou shalt not.
Aeneas believed that unless boys were steeped from the beginning of the best books, their minds would be ruined and they would not be able to acquire good judgment. So Chaucer was influenced by the ideas of humanism. So here we have humanism explaining away the spiritual world and introducing the carnal world, with these high intellectuals leaning to their own understanding, trying to explain all of Most High's miraculous works with science. Making you trust more in the flesh than in the spirit.
The New Age movement is the natural progression of humanism. That's what we were taught in school. Humanism. You weren't taught philosophy, you was taught humanism. In other words, man exalted. You got what I'm saying? Man exalted. Everything is about you and what you like.
Okay, Geoffrey Chaucer introduced feminism, influenced by humanism. Humanism, feminism. Now, humanism is attacking the word, and feminism, I'm assuming, is attacking man. Let's find out. I want to find this femininity occurring in the word. I want to find what it actually is. Let's start with Isaiah chapter 3 verse 12. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. So we have to analyze that, precept upon precept, line upon line. That leads us to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 13. But I will have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is Most High. The head of every man is Christ. We are going to focus on that. So we'll use these two scriptures because if man is the head and woman is the tail, and you flip-flop those roles, you would get woman is the head, man is the tail, hence woman rule over thee. Let's break this down and unmask what this feminine spirit really is. So, for a man to be the head, the man must be headed by Christ. We must first understand what it is to be headed by Christ. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 10 through 23, it speaks of Christ giving pastors, teachers, evangelists, and prophets for the perfection of the saints, edifying the body of Christ, to prevent us from being tossed to and fro by doctrine, to speak truth and in love, so we grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. So you see, we must first grow up in Christ in all things with truth and love. So we keep reading and it tells us, walk not as Gentiles in vanity of the mind. It also tells us in 22 to put off or do away with former conversation, which was the old man, which is corrupt according to deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. New mind to avoid being corrupted by deceitful lust. Why is this so important to have a new mind? Let's start there.
The people in our country tasked with the responsibility of thinking clearly for everybody else. The president, the leaders, the Supreme Court, those who are supposed to be the most clear-minded, clear-headed, who have the greatest responsibility to protect this nation, they literally can't think straight. The reprobate mind has ascended the bench. The reprobate mind has now reached the highest levels.
So we're going to go to 1 Timothy to find out why it's so important to put on this new mind. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 5 through 9, it speaks of perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, supposing gain is godliness, says to withdraw thyself from these people. Be content with food and raiment, for we brought nothing into this world, but they that will be rich fall into temptation and the snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 13, but evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. So a new mind is a new way of thinking, and there's a very good reason for that, which is going to bring us closer to connecting our next dot of why we should avoid hurtful lust, or why we should avoid lust. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. A desire is a strong feeling of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen by definition. So let's precept to get a clear picture on this one. The heart. Because desire comes from the heart.
It is true that our heart's desire constantly changes, which is why we need to constantly check in and question our heart's desires.
Proverbs chapter 12, verse 20. Deceit is in the heart of them that imagine evil, but to the counselors of peace is joy. When you look at Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, it speaks of the heart being deceitful above all things and desperately wicked.
Hello there, I'm George Putnam. I'd like to begin with a fact, a simple yet shocking fact. It is this: a flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity and is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children. We know that once a person is perverted, it is practically impossible for that person to adjust to normal attitudes in regard to sex. Obscene literature is a $2 billion a year business. That's $2 billion. Through this material, today's youth can be stimulated to sexual activity for which he has no legitimate outlet. He is even enticed to enter the world of homosexuals, lesbians, sadists, masochists, and other sex deviants. The Military Chaplains Association of the United States, practically every major fraternal, civic, and religious organization, the juvenile court judges, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, innumerable psychiatrists, sociologists, and psychologists attribute the moral decay among our people in very large part to the obscene and pornographic literature so prevalent in our society. This moral decay weakens our resistance to the onslaught of the communist masters of deceit. The most insidious feature of these publications is that they glorify crime and ridicule law and authority. Vice is presented as fun. This warped idea of fun has contributed to the fact that 1 out of every 20 children born in the United States last year was illegitimate. The rate of illegitimacy has been steadily climbing, and the care of these children costs taxpayers $1 billion a year in government aid. This does not take into account the human misery or suffering that cannot be measured in dollars and cents. And here again, an appeal to the sodomist with a play upon the buttocks, the laced leather garment. This picture hints at the common idea of bestiality. Dr. Sorokin, the renowned sociologist at Harvard, says that today the newsstands, quote, depict the world as a sort of human zoo inhabited by raped, mutilated, and murdered females, and by he-males outmatching in bestiality cavemen and outlusting the lustiest of animals. Male and female alike are hardened in cynical contempt of human life and values, unquote.
What does the Bible have to say about lust? A presentation of God Questions Ministries. The dictionary definition of lust is 1. Intense or unrestrained sexual craving, or 2. An overwhelming desire or craving. The Bible speaks of lust in several ways. Exodus 20 verses 14 and 17. Do not commit adultery. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that your neighbor owns. Or Matthew 5 verse 28. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eye has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Job 31 verses 11 and 12 sums up lust quite nicely. For lust is a shameful sin, a crime that should be punished. It is a devastating fire that destroys to hell. It would wipe out everything I own. Lust has as its focus pleasing oneself.
Now we have renewing of the mind, and we see scriptures on the heart as well. We're getting an idea of how to become the head, which is under Christ. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 19 through 20. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh, and will give them an heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God.
He's building this town as an even bigger act of faith, but they don't understand. None of them. And I don't have the right words to help them with the book does.
Okay, now if you have not put on the new mind and the new heart, you open yourself to things that pull you off your path and try to keep you off your path.
Of the 19 major civilizations to vanish from the earth. Magnificent Egypt, classical Greece, imperial Rome, all crumbled away. not because of the strength of the aggressor, but because of moral decay from within.
Let's see what happens when you don't renew your mind and heart. When you go to Romans chapter 1, verse 24, wherefore Most High also gave them up to the uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. In verse 26, it speaks, for this cause Most High gave them up unto vile affections. Vile affections.
3 times now in the remainder of this chapter it says, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own heart, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now, if you want to know how far man goes down in immorality, it's always measured by this matter of sex.
For even their women did change their natural use into that which is against nature. In verse 27, and likewise also the man, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another.
In the spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Do you see a connection now?
Men grow bold as they grow old. They all lose their charms in the end. All men are wankers, said Christabel Pankhurst. Women are a girl's best friend. You have to be enraged. I still have the rage, and I still carry the rage. Rage is absolutely fundamental, not anger. It's not strong enough. It has to be rage.
As women, while men's thoughts were still around, and what could we really be, and who could we really become, and what would a woman's culture look like, and what would a woman's world would work, and how could it be organized?
With feminism, it's rejecting women's nature. There is a thing called femininity. There is a thing called masculinity. And the war on women, which is waged by feminism, is a war that shames women for wanting to be feminine. It shames women for wanting to reconnect with who they are by nature.
Arguing that women would only be free if they stopped having sex with men. Giving up fucking for a feminist is about taking your politics seriously. Women who are socialists are prepared to give up many things which they might enjoy because they see how these things tie into and support the whole system of economic class oppression which they are fighting. They will resist buying Cape apples because the profits go to South Africa. Obviously, it's more difficult for some feminists to give up penetration, which is so fundamental to the system of oppression which we are fighting. The revolutionary feminists advocated what they called political lesbianism. This meant becoming a lesbian for political reasons, whether you fancied women or not.
So being a feminist brought me to lesbianism as well.
If it hadn't been for feminism, I'd be married and sleeping with the woman next door or something. I very much doubt that I would have had the energy or the creativity to live a lesbian lifestyle.
Oh, what was it?
Yeah.
Was it that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's that?
That's it.
Yeah, we got into that quite a lot, the feminist vagina.
If it's still unclear to you, we'll go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9. This speaks directly to the culprit at hand. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of Most High? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind.
It's crazy, like the Dennis Hastert guy who was leading the charge in the house. The stuff he's in now, they say he's a serial child molester. He only got 15 months.
He got all that sickness, and by the way, it's their right to do it, but Hillary and a whole lot of the Democratic Party hierarchy, Cruz and Rubio, they're on the gay side, so it's all right if they want to do it, but at least tell us so we know what we're doing when you start running the LGBT thing is the main point. Obama's too, from what he's done with his executive orders, the rest of us feel kind of left out. But it's your business. You got a right to do whatever you want to do. More power to you if you take over the political.
So you saying like there's actually like I could say like a gay mafia that's running.
Not gay mafia. It's just they've organized with Hollywood to run the main propaganda engine for the world, and they brought it up. It would have been nice if African Americans had that advantage.
So what you say? Like the political leadership of this country, most of them are.
They favor it. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
The LGBTQ stuff.
That questioning part.
The questioning part. So it is a gay agenda, though.
But see, it's like going to school, for example, in California. When I was out there 3 or 4 weeks ago, some parents showed me some flyers that are sent home with them. They're telling the parents, don't try to tell your son to be a man or tell your daughter to be a lady, because you should not try to influence their gender orientation. That should be up to them. So I don't buy that. You tell your boy act like a man, but they want you not to tell your boy child that and let him make up his mind what he wants to do.
Okay, now all this is beginning to make sense. We can tie up some loose ends and get more of a description of what this is when you look into 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. The God of this world blinded the minds of them which believe not.
We can learn a lot about the attack of the enemy from the story of Balaam and Balak. Balaam was hired by Balak to curse Israel, and though he tried 3 times, he was unable to curse them. However, he gave advice to Balak about how to destroy Israel. He told Balak that all he needed to do to defeat Israel was to send women to seduce Israel and cause them to sin against God. And that's exactly what happened. Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. The warning in Revelation tells us that this is still the strategy of the enemy.
We'll start with King Solomon. In 1 Kings chapter 11, the first verse, it tells us of Solomon's fall. Verse 1, but King Solomon loved many strange women together with the daughter of Pharaoh. He married women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and the Hittites. Solomon had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. Now in verse 4, it tells us when Solomon grew old, his wives began to turn his heart after other gods. Now, key word is they began to turn his heart. His heart was not perfect with Most High. Most High warned Solomon in verse 2 that they would surely turn his heart away after other gods. Now here's the connecting dot. Remember this. In verse 5, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians. Ashtaroth was a goddess over the Canaanites, goddess of fertility with Baal. That is going to be a new clue that we're going to start connecting the dots to. Remember that. Let's look at Samson. Samson in Judges 16 speaks of Samson who came to love a woman in the valley of Sorek named Delilah. Samson was special in Judges 13. It speaks of an angel coming to his mother and telling her to keep from unclean things and to keep a razor from his head, for Samson shall deliver Israel from the Philistines. Now that's important because Delilah was actually approached by the Philistines to find out Samson's secret, which was actually his hair. In verse 6 through 15, it shows of 3 attempts where Delilah tried to get Samson's secret. In verse 15, Delilah questions his love for her because he won't tell her. 16 and 17, she presses him so much that his soul was vexed unto death that he told her all his heart. There we go again, his heart. When Delilah got his truth, she called the Philistines, and they took him and took out his eyes and put him in prison. Now let's connect the dots here again. The heart was turned from Most High, and another encounter of Baal still in here. How? I'll show you. The Philistines held Israel captive for 40 years due to the children doing evil in the sight of Most High. Now the Philistines used Delilah to get Samson. In Judges chapter 16, verse 23, it tells us who the God of the Philistines are. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god. Okay, Dagon was Baal's father. Dagon is son to Anu. There's Baal again. Now, let's tie these stories together with Jezebel. Okay, so Jezebel was wife to Ahab. You have Ahab who sinned, and the Bible says Ahab did do evil in the sight of Most High and above all kings before him. Jezebel drew him to Baal, and he built altars in his name. It speaks of this in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 31. The story I want to focus on is where Ahab went to Naboth's vineyard, and he offered money or another vineyard for his, but he refused because Most High forbid him to sell the land of his forefathers. Ahab wept, and Jezebel came in and asked why. Sin lieth at the door to make your desires rule over you. Does it sound familiar here? Jezebel suggested to frame Naboth and of blasphemy and forged Ahab's signature and sent it to the elders to have Naboth stoned to death. So here we have sin and covetousness clouding Ahab's mind and yet again his heart. But the key thing here is he also drew to Baal. Like I said in 1 Kings 16 and 31, it says that she drew him to Baal. All three of these occasions, they gave their heart away. Well, they gave their heart to something other than Most High and failed to Baal worship. What is this Baal worship?
Building of the temple of Baal in New York City and London, and now it's being reported that they're going to be building this temple of Baal all around the world in over 100 different locations. So if you're not familiar with who Baal is, well, Baal, in the Old Testament we know and learn of Baal and how people would commit child sacrifice. They would sacrifice their children to Baal as a way of appeasing him. And of course, Baal in modern interpretation is Satan. So they're erecting these temples in New York City and in London for Satan himself. For Baal worship. We can't even get a statue of the Ten Commandments on American soil anywhere, but it's no big deal, and no Christians are in an uproar, and no people seem to care, because most people haven't read their Bible, or most people just are lukewarm. There is a temple being erected for the God in the Bible, the false god known as Baal, who people worship and sacrifice their children to. They did child sacrifice to this deity, who is now known as Satan, and it's being erected around the world. And we're okay with this child sacrifice. Everybody okay out there?
Well, do you think there are any elements of Baal worship in our society today?
Yes, of course there is. Think about it just for a moment. When we sacrifice our unborn children in order to secure maybe financial prosperity or to be free or to have a better life. I think the number now in the United States is that since Roe versus Wade, more than 60 million children have been slaughtered. This is very much akin to what happened in Baal.
When you look femininity up on Wiki, it actually gives you a synonym with the mythical goddess Isis. That is who is killing Christians today. And in the Bible, you had Jezebel killing the prophets. In order to draw the children of Israel to Baal worship so that they might usher in evil. And it seems like they have to kill off the prophets in order to silence the word, that they can build their own doctrine or their own religion, however you want to word it. Throughout the centuries, it seems to have changed its face and name, but the same game. Now you have deceitfully manipulated the world back into Baal worship. So femininity is just one of many fruits of sexual immoralities. So the seed of lust stems to sexual immorality, stems to femininity amongst many others, which has caused the fall of many civilizations before.
The book of Revelation begins with some stern warnings to the congregation of believers about their sexual sin. It mentions the doctrine of Balaam and the seduction of Jezebel that are leading believers into sexual immorality. But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold to the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality.
Because you was raised on secular humanism and socialism, and man is inherently good, and we were not taught spiritual things. We don't understand the spirit world. We don't understand there's a real devil. There's a guy named Satan. This was Lucifer, and he has people in this earth that are doing his will for him. So because we're not taught the true nature of man. Say the true nature of man. We were not taught the true nature of man without God, because when everybody was telling us we were good all the time, even without God. So we don't know that the true nature of man is to continually do evil. That's what the Bible says in Genesis 6. That's why God destroyed the earth. He said, because man's heart is just continually to do evil.
The temple of Baal is going to be recreated in Times Square, New York. Is that something to be concerned about? I mean, it concerns me.
I think it's something that we have to be extraordinarily concerned about. First and foremost, we need to pray.
Topic. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, baby.